Okay, so this is our welcome back everybody to our first technically teaching class, and today we're going to be looking at um, chapter one and the preface for the entire textbook, Exploring Leadership by Comais and the others, um, or as we say in citation language, Kumal et al. Is that it? Anybody knows or familiar with that? All right. So first thing first, let's look at the course description. This comes from the course outline. So the first thing we want to point out here is that this is not the end all and be all of leadership studies. It is in fact just a introductory course, but it's an introductory course into a very specific leadership model that we're going to be focusing on. And in that model, we're going to focus our attention on your personal experiences with leadership, either from being a subordinate in a leadership position or being leaders yourselves. So we're going to be calling upon your personal experiences in most of the assignments, especially the first one here, which is the self-analysis. And you'd realize that this here is the assignment one that you're dealing with. Well, once the assignment one, we have an assignment based upon a self-analysis element that we're looking at here. We are also going to be exploring your own value structures or value systems. That's also part of the self-assessment. And we'll be examining that in a lot more detail um, when you start to respond to in the midterm exercise. There's a whole section there on that's going to look at your ethical values and stuff like that. We are also going to look at ethical decision making, which again comes up in the midterm exercise, and there are two chapters on ethical decision making and ethics across the board, ethics and moral values. So that will be examined heavily in these areas here. All right, now course objectives, again coming from the course outline. So we'll be able to look at and examine the various theories of leadership that exist. In fact, we'll be doing that in chapter 3, chapter 2 actually. That's next week. Try to apply and defend decisions that we've made utilizing an analysis of ethical decision-making tools. That's, again, as I said, there are two chapters that deal with this area that you guys have to present actually. And we will be looking at your past behavior to be able to try and do some evaluations in retrospect of what you've done in the past and how the ethical tools that you'll be introduced to will either justify or, well, really classify what you've done in terms of where the tools speak to decision making. All right, so it's a retroactive or retrograde type of evaluation that you're going to do of past behavior. Create a plan that applies the concepts of good governance. So that is the final or the last unit that you're looking at, or I shouldn't say unit, but the last assignment that you're doing where you're doing a leadership plan. That is encompassed in this element here. Organize teams in such a way that the demonstration displays an awareness and understanding of group dynamics and teamwork. So that is going to be done by first the small little the two-man teams you all are working in, and then we have another team-based activity that's going to take place later on in the semester when we get into the debating activities. So again, we also have an entire chapter dedicated in terms of a presentation to evaluating teams and teamwork and that kind of stuff. So you guys are going to examine the dynamics of teams because we really can't get much done without teamwork. All right. We're going to examine issues facing leadership across the board, locally, regionally, internationally, because we're going to be drawing upon the past behaviors and current behaviors of leaders around us to, draw conclusions and have a look at how things are going. And the last one here is pretty important. This one is that we expect that you're going to display and modify behaviors indicative of personal philosophies of positive leadership and ethics. So at the end of the day, what we're looking for is you to change your behavior in such a manner that it reflects upon your acceptance of this particular leadership model and begin to make some changes. Now, how will that change be made? So if we think about behavior modification or behavior, how many of you here, is there anybody here from sociology or all of your uh, business students? Trying to remember most of your backgrounds.
So I'm doing Psychology 106.
All right, good. So you tell me what is the all right, how has behavior modification been used over time in your lifespan? How have you gotten your behavior changed in the past? Okay, so this
Well,
is
we learn about behaviorism.
uh-huh.
So it's a change due to uh different conditioning learning.
Right. So that's where is that with external stimulus or internal?
Internal.
Is it? What causes
No,
the
so external.
external? All right. Okay.
External.
So like children, for example, a lot of times parents utilize external um, stimulus to motivate their behavioral changes, and those behaviors become habit forming. That makes sense. So things like how do so in your case in the past, how was that done?
So when you do something positive, they reward you, and when you do something negative, they punish you.
Right. Yeah. So the punishments can vary from at various levels of harshness. Correct. So I know in my days we used to get licks. I don't know what's going on these days. How many of you here are parents? Just as having real trouble. Are there any parents here among us? No, no parents. So most of you all are fairly young. All right. So it it means that in the past, the methodology that was utilized was punishment primarily. And it's funny because most of the times we were noticed by our parents was only when we did wrong things. So it gives a kind of negative reinforcement. But what we found is that in a lot of instances, if the stimulus is removed, the behavior reverts back to what the person naturally wants to do. So in this case here, what we found, or the research has indicated, is that if the impetus to make the change is internally generated, that you want to make this change, then those changes have a better chance of sticking. That makes sense because you're internally motivated to want to make that particular change. Can you think of any behavior modifications that you have undergone on your own with internal motivations? Can any of you all think about something along those lines that you've engaged in? Anybody? Changing a bad habit that you've had because you want to improve yourself. You can't think of anybody can't think of anything at all. Just curious.
Study habits. Study habits.
Study habits. Does that
Yeah.
stick?
Yeah, actually, after failing a few courses, it does stick.
Hard lessons, right?
Hard lessons, yeah.
Right. And that happens because why? Why did that happen?
I guess because
Because
we tend to value it after we realize the importance of it.
Okay, so it was important for you internally to be able to accomplish those particular goals so that it meets with your overall requirements of where you want to be in the future. That's correct, right? I mean, I'm kind of getting along those lines. That makes sense,
Yes.
Jada? Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody else
Yeah.
wanted to pick. All right. I saw somebody else open their mic. They wanted to make a contribution.
so I was going along the lines of self-discipline,
Yes.
but
Yeah, but that is one of the motivating factors that could come along. Welcome, Miss Morris. We're already into the first chapter, so to speak, but we're looking at one of the learning outcomes from the course outline. So welcome aboard, Miss Morris.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, so we were talking about one of the objectives of the course is to modify your behavior in the future. And interestingly enough, that's a very difficult thing for a course run over a 15-week period to try to accomplish. Um, but the way in which we're hoping that it will happen is that you would want to make these particular changes because you would agree with the philosophy of the model that we're going to be looking at. So let's crack on here from there. So the textbook that we or textbooks we are going to be looking at, right? So this should say required text. Um, the Exploring Leadership by Kumails et al. And the Leadership Experience by Daft. Now, you all are familiar with the various chapters. We're not looking at the entire textbook, but we're looking, a lot of what we're looking at comes from the Exploring Leadership textbook, where we're going to be doing from chapters 1 to chapter 9 out of that textbook. And we're going to be adding on to that a couple of chapters, maybe about 5 chapters from the 2, 3, 4. Well, yeah, about 5 to 6 chapters out of the the leadership experience from the DAFT, and the combination of the chapters going to try to outline and describe the leadership model that we're going to be looking at, and that is where we're going to begin. Yes, question, Josiah.
You are sharing your screen right now?
Say that again.
If you're sharing your screen right now,
If I
if you're sharing your screen, like screen share,
Okay, I can barely make out what you're saying.
then hold on.
Um,
Yeah, I'm better or no?
oh, much better here. Yes,
No, I was asking if you're sharing your screen right now, no?
yes, I am actually. Am I not?
Because I just seen I just seen the names of the people in the class and your face.
Okay.
And I see
I
the
am
screen is
seeing
big.
the
I'm seeing too.
Everybody's seeing the. All right. Let me. Josiah, I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna stop sharing and then come back and see if that helps you. All right.
Okay.
And I'll share again because you've been having some issues. Are you seeing anything there now?
Yeah, now I see it.
All right. And if I bring this up like that and then bring this back on, do you see that there now?
Yeah, I see it.
All right. Cool. Hold a second here, guys. Let me just take this for 1 second. All right, Josiah is seeing it still, right?
Yeah, I see it too.
Okay, good. All right, so In unit 1, the first thing that we want to be looking at really in the introductory or the preface area is looking at leadership in our current state in the modern world. So one of the things that carries over from some of the older situations when we look at leadership is where leadership comes from and how people arrive in positions of leadership, and that is something that um, in our current state we are of the firm belief in the model that we're going to be looking at is that leaders aren't born but they are made because we have a paucity of individuals who seem to have the or display the characteristics necessary for leadership. So in the 21st century, the question of leaders being born or made is one of the concepts that we're going to be dealing with here. And a lot of people still have this idea that you're either a natural born leader or you're not a leader at all. And we want to dissuade people from the whole concept of this born leadership um, phenomenon because as you would see, the research does not actually reflect that. And in fact, you all will get a chance to debate that concept if you so choose. All right. We want to also look at the leadership in the Caribbean context in particular by focusing on how leadership works and its how it historically how it works in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean. We need to do that on our own, however. We'll have to draw on our own experiences because the textbooks we're utilizing are of a US origin. And they're going to focus in those textbooks on the experience of leadership in their environments. But we have to translate that now into our own local versions and regional versions of it. So that's going to be an important element that we have to put into gear. So when we look at something from the US perspective, we have to be able to translate it to what is the Caribbean context. All right, and we'll start to see that across the board. So let's start with how the model that we're looking at defines relationship. And from the definition, it gives us its name. So leadership is defined as a relational and ethical process of people working together to accomplish positive change. So the nature of leadership here, or the focal point of any form of leadership, is about the relationships that are developed between leaders and subordinates and vice versa. So the model that we're looking at is actually called the relational leadership model because it focuses our attention on the importance of the quality of relationships that we have with our leaders and with subordinates when we're in leadership positions. So that's going to be really important because if you think about trying to do anything, any great feat of work or any accomplish any major goal in your life, you're going to require the cooperation of individuals to get things done. So the nature of your relationship will either assist in that or it will prevent that from happening. The quality of your leadership, your relationship is going to be that will best define or categorize that. Now, if you think about this from the concept of your past experience with your teachers in school, which are the subjects that you tend to do well in, as opposed to those that you had problems with? If you think about your experiences here in Costat as well, because you meet so many different lecturers from one semester to the next, and in fact, after a little while, students tend to kind of try to gravitate to one or particular group of lecturers because of they feel more comfortable. What can you say from your experience is the key situation that is pulling you towards those individuals, and why was the experience better? Aaron, any contribution that you want to make for that? How about the Leon? I'm gonna call on you all, so can't have the same people making contributions all. Yes, yes, Dilion. What I was asking about is that what is the quality of your relationship with those teachers with whom you did well in school over your years?
Well, sometimes my teachers and I would have good relationships, but sometimes it wouldn't be so good, even though I know I'm doing good in the class.
Mm-hmm. But which ones did you find you had the best success?
Um, English A.
Right,
Like,
and what was your relationship like with that particular lecturer?
it was good at times,
Hmm?
but she used to think we used to talk a lot.
Well, yeah, because they have to pull you in line. But what about your, as opposed to that in your secondary school, what about here in Costa?
I believe everything way better now.
Uh-huh.
I have great relationships with all my lecturers, even though I've never been in class physical. It was always a good relationship.
So far, that's great. Congratulations. But it means that what makes it a lot easier for you is the fact that you are having good relationships with them. Yes? So,
Yes.
Dilly, have you ever worked before?
Just internship and my own business.
All right. So, do you have people who answer to you in your business? Or is it a self-run business?
No, self.
So it's primarily based upon your own efforts.
Yeah.
Might you want to describe to us what type of business you're in? Maybe we could
What
draw up.
type of business?
Yeah.
Clothing.
Sorry?
Clothing
Clothing.
and accessories. Yeah.
All right. So what you do, you distribute and sell?
Yes.
Okay.
Retail. Yeah.
Any kind of particular styles of clothing or?
All styles.
All right. Do you have a link that you'd like to share with the class at some point in time?
Yeah, I have a link for all my social media. So.
All right. Well, if you want, I'm giving you permission with the permission of the class to share the link in the WhatsApp chat. So maybe you could drum up some business. Would that be okay with everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. How do you facilitate payment?
Payment is via bank deposits and online bank transfers. I would only do cash on delivery if it's by a police station.
That makes a lot of sense. The only drawback with that would be I have to trust that you would make deliveries, right?
Yeah. And
Right.
also TT Post.
Right. Money orders. Okay. All right. That sounds good. Well, I'll be curious to see what your stuff is. But do you have repeat customers? A lot of repeat customers?
Um, Kind of, because on now start off, like a
Uh-huh.
few months ago, I get new customers. I gain new customers every day, every week after doing promotions and stuff. But some just come back. Some customers just come back.
All right.
I had a few.
One of the things that I remember is that there was in a brick and mortar building, that there was a situation where we were having, when I say we, my ex-wife and I were having problems finding clothes for her because of how small she was. She was very petite. And we had always come across these stores that had really nice outfits, but they were simply not in small enough to handle her and we used to have real problems whenever she had any sort of event to go to find outfits, and it was really problematic. And I remember us going to a particular store and meeting a particular owner there, and the relationship that she was able to develop with that particular owner caused my ex-wife to be able to go back to her time and time again and always get these great outfits and whatnot. And they developed a really good relationship. In fact, so much so that anytime she wanted to get something new, that would be the place she would always go to. And I remember the important element there was the nature of the relationship that was developed. Because as the, the, the owner of the store started to understand her issues and her preferences, she began to go in the back and pull out outfits that she had in stock that would have made up outfits for her and in the sizes. So she automatically knew, okay, this would work for you. This would looks good for you, but I don't have the sizes that you want. If you want, I can back order some. And she started to develop that relationship. And the nature of the relationship led to them having positive transactions all the time. That's something that you could look forward to. If you maintain positive relationships with your customers, because in the case of your situation there, you are the leader, you're running the show. And the thing about clothing is highly personal, so that everybody is anxious to probably see your portfolio or to see your wares, as they say. um, and set up orders and whatnot. So the idea would be how you follow through with it, and that is actually a very good example of how the relationship and your ethical process, because now we have to, in the situation that we find ourselves in an online environment, it's quite easy for somebody to pose as uh, um, as a trader and fleece people of money because they're trusting that they can make a money transfer to you and they're going to get their goods, but you can in fact get their money and not deliver. You're following? So there's a great deal of trust that has to be developed with yourself and others. And this is one of the reasons why I asked about repeat customers, because repeat customers means you're not only is your product meeting the expectations, but your service is trustworthy, and that speaks to your ethical behavior. So hopefully we'll see more of that. You said you now started, so you have a ways to go. All right. Okay. So moving along here, how we look at leadership, and this is one of the things we were talking about, and we'll get back to the business aspect of it. We can look at leadership from different frameworks, and the first framework we're looking at here is the one that always comes to mind when we think about leadership. We always tend to think about leadership from the political sense. Who's in charge and of the government and that kind of stuff. When we look at leadership in the political sciences, what we're actually looking at is how people arrive at getting power, either through elections or through force, and what they use that power to do, influencing others. All right, so it's a combination of power and influence. There's a chapter that is going to address power and influence in a lot of detail later on in the presentations that you'll be dealing with. Now, when we think from an international standpoint, we start to think of people like this. Here we have the presidents and prime ministers of various countries. And these three in particular have become into a lot of focus because they represent countries that are in direct conflict with each other. The United States, China, and Russia. The Ukraine situation and the trade situation with China is something that the United States is having a lot of challenges facing, and therefore the leaders that represent these countries are utilizing their power and position in world politics in places like the NATO summit to influence the outcome of what is going to take place in their in terms of the world exchange of power. Now, can we think about this from the local positioning? So if we look at the local positioning of how people arrive at power, in our case here, people arrive in positions of political authority via elections. And those that don't arrive at it from via elections. They get it through appointments to state boards and appointments to various positions in cabinet and so on. You're familiar with that, right? So you don't necessarily need to be, you could be a minister in the ministry, but not actually be an elected official. You're familiar with that concept, correct? You don't pay attention to local politics at all? I guess not. Nyla, Josiah, go ahead. Not so much? All right. Josiah, your audio's messing up again, huh? Selena, you wanted to say something?
I said not so much dealing up with the politics, but I do watch it.
All right. No, interestingly enough, it's important for in this class that we're going to have to pay attention to things in a little more detail. But you understand this whole concept of power and influence and how you use that power to influence people to be able to serve your needs. And that's the thing about political leadership. Political leadership is about amassing power and influence so that you can gain the best circumstances or outcomes to meet your requirements. And your requirements may represent the needs of a country, or it may be very personal in terms of what you're doing. It depends upon the nature of the leader that finds themselves in power. So, for example, when we look at international dictators, so people who are dictators of countries, their behavior, power, and influence there is markedly different to those that come from democratic situations. So, which is one of the reasons why they people are very suspicious of the Chinese prime minister or president, because his rise to power comes through a different type of system that we may be accustomed to in the communist state of Republic of China. Similarly, this guy Putin came to power utilizing some of the old school techniques from the Russian environment, as opposed to Biden, who comes from the US democratic system. Now, they all claim that they have a form of voting going on in each of their countries, but a lot of people have accused Russia of engaging in strong arm tactics. China, the same thing was applied to him in terms of how he was able to get the Chinese party to elect him as premier. And we all probably followed a lot of the issues surrounding the rise of, the Biden's return to power after he left after Trump and the whole hullabaloo that went on in relation to that. So we have every system of government has its issues that have to be addressed. Similarly, if you look among these individuals here, that I'm pretty certain that almost everybody here went through some sort of political struggle to find themselves in a position of power throughout in their experiences. So this gentleman on the side here, for example, this you all recognize this young fella here by chance? No?
No, sir.
All right, he's the Prime Minister of Canada. Justin Trudeau. Sounds familiar now? All right. He's one of the youngest, but he comes from a tradition. He comes from a yes, Josiah.
No, I was gonna say no.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's the Prime Minister of Canada, and his father was the Prime Minister, one of the longest serving Prime Ministers of Canada in the past, many years ago, actually. I think his last term was in the late 80s or so. And he's very popular, as you can see, he's very attractive looking. And he appeals to a younger audience of people who believe he has their interests at heart. He's having a rough time now because he's had a fair amount of challenges that he has to face in relation to that. So I expect that as he progresses through, he's going to look a lot different from there. All right, so we understand this whole thing of political power and how politics looks at power. It's about how you arrive in positions of power and how you use that power to influence decisions to make your own, to achieve your own goals. Now, in terms of like what Mr. Leon is doing, management looks at, now this is with larger organizations, but management are always focused on outcomes. Now, your business will not make sense if you're not making money. And that money needs to be able to meet all your requirements plus give you a profit payment. So when you bring on other people to work with you, what you're going to be looking at is how much has your profit levels risen, and you're going to pay attention to the relationship that you have between subordinates and supervisors to be able to get that output. So it's very limited in its scope because your focus is only on how the firm benefits, and primarily the way it's benefits is through the amount of profit it generates. So let's look at these leaders here. These are top 20 business leaders in the world from as stated by 2021 by this Fortune magazine. How many of these people do you recognize? Anybody? Let me make it bigger so that you can see what I'm talking about. Anybody recognize any of these people?
Yes, Sir Jason.
1,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
All right, so just which one are we talking about? All right, do you recognize this gentleman here with the microphone?
No.
Yeah, Bill Gates.
Bill
That's my
Gates?
husband.
That's your husband? Did somebody say that's your husband? Okay, so Bill Gates is known for the fortune he amassed in Microsoft. Or what about this gentleman on the side here?
That is Jeff Bezos.
What's he famous for?
Amazon.
Right, good. What about this gentleman here?
I'm not sure who's him.
Okay,
Something
anybody?
Jeff.
Sorry?
His name is Jeffrey or something.
His name is Richard
Richard.
Branson. And if you think about Virgin Airlines and Virgin Records, that'd be the guy who runs that. So, most of you might know her because we saw her on television a lot. Who's this?
That's Oprah. Oprah.
Winfrey, right? What about this little gentleman over here, this Asian guy?
The creator of Alibaba. Don't know his real name.
Yes, I can never pronounce his name properly, but yes, he's famous for that, creator of Alibaba. What about this guy down here?
Cancelled.
Cancelled?
That's
That's his
Elon
name. Elon Musk, right? Okay. This lady here, any of you recognize her? No? Martha
Musk. I
Stewart?
can't remember her name.
Martha Stewart?
Right. I know she was a cook or something.
She was a crook, yes. She went to jail for insider trading. Yeah. But she was and after she came out of jail, she was kind of redeemed herself a bit as well too. So I don't know what kind of jail that was. All right, so I can tell you honestly, I don't recognize these.
What's her name?
What did I just say? Martha Stewart. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so I can't recognize these guys, but I know I've seen them on talk shows around the place. I think this lady here is a leader from the IMF or the World Bank or something like that. I'm not sure. This gentleman you should recognize from the music industry. That's Jay-Z. Anybody familiar with this lady here? She looks familiar. I still haven't been able to find out who she is. But no, this is Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, and has been known to invest a lot of money and make a lot of money over time. This gentleman here, everybody should know him, or some of you should know him. Anybody? Mark Zuckerberg, that's Facebook, and all the other side businesses that he's taken over. This gentleman here, I'm not sure who he is as well. But again, these are individuals who are known for making a lot of money. Is not that the key issue that that takes place when we talk about successful business people? So the measuring tool for management leadership is you're only successful if you've made a lot of money. So now you can understand when we speak to management, the way in which you make your money is the the focal point of your success. It doesn't focus on the nature or the ethics of your relationship. So we know, for example, that early on in Bill Gates' career, he stole stuff from people and manipulated systems so that it suited his needs. You all know about that, right? If you want to know about that, there's a television series called Pirates of Silicon Valley that you could look back at the history of the rise of Microsoft and Apple and all that stuff. Jeff Bezos is heavily criticized for the way in which workers who work in his what they call fulfillment centers are treated in relation to the nature of the employment conditions under which they work. Elon Musk is known to be a very arrogant individual who mistreats a lot of people. Martha Stewart was thrown in jail for insider trading and cheating. Mark Zuckerberg has always been associated with the with issues of selling people's information. Jay-Z has been in so many different things. It's unbelievable. But they've all classified themselves as important people because they've achieved so much sales, so much money, and become so successful, and relatively infamous in some instances. So, is that a good framework for looking at leadership? Not necessarily. So let's look at another framework. Another way in which we can look at leadership is through anthropology. And in this case here, what we're doing is a sort of retrograde look at society by examining their culture, the culture of that society, the languages, tools, and symbols and norms from that society that we can dig up, especially if we look at much older societies. But anthropology also looks at current societies as well, because what happens is we need to be mapping what is taking place in our societies as we speak, as we live in it. So we're observing what's happening with our language. What is happening with our language? Um, More so our written language, because our spoken word will not survive unless it survives by only word of mouth. The written word is what will tend to be taken forward. But the vast majority of written words now are not generated on paper or carved into stone as in the past, but they sit in digital forums. So that means the physical anthropology, the artifacts that if we were to come back 1,000 years from now and dig up um, a cave or uncover the home of individuals living in this time, what we will find is a lot of useless old um, devices like these, because it's devices like these that our lives basically sit in terms of our things. So the language that we speak and the culture that we develop is reflected in the physical anthropology that will be discovered in relation to the way in which our society runs. So people who are able to take the lead in the services required to support the 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 software environment or the virtual environment that we live in would become those people who would be looked upon as being leaders. So this is where anthropology sort of evaluates how previous cultures or previous societies develop their leadership as opposed to how we have transitioned into our situation now. I mean, there are people now who are viewed as influencers. What is an influencer? You all tell me because you all live in this world more than I do. What is an influencer? Anybody? Chanel, what's an influencer as far as you can manage to work out?
You're asking the wrong person because I think I live in the same times as you. Sorry.
No, you can't get away with that. You need to know what is an influencer because those are the kind of leaders that we have around us.
No, seriously, no, because the leaders, well, the influencers of today, well, the people that is called influencers today, I'm not sure.
I think
Yeah,
the
but
people who sell. Okay, so
go
to
ahead. Yes, go ahead.
explain it, there's two categories in the sense of an influencer because they're self-identified influencers who believe that they are influencing in some way and their whole life is the main character. However, but however, there's the other side of influencing where people actually stand for something or advocate for a specific view,
Position.
like point
Yeah,
of view,
yeah,
and then there's there's a split. That's where the split is. So
yeah,
most times it's misinterpreted as the self-identified influencers, quote unquote, but
yeah.
they are others.
But what
Like,
what determines when somebody is classified as an influencer?
well, in general, it's how you manipulate this social media space, and you usually build a social media brand,
A
and that
following?
is yeah, that's in general what it is.
So
Your
that that
your
that that is
social
that's
media.
linked to something that was created by Mr. Zuckerberg. The amount of
Correct.
likes you get. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see where Facebook started, because I remember in the 90s, well, the late 90s, early 2000s, when Facebook first came on the market, and everybody was liking this and liking that. God forbid, the amount of likes that you get for something now is determines whether or not it's of value to everybody else. So the more likes you get, the more notice you get, then you fall into that position of, well, this person is being followed by so many people, and therefore they are influencers, as opposed to what Jada was saying. They're those people who actually have a position that they've taken and have arrived at a position of influence through hard work and through commitment to some position. Other people have arrived at being influencers by simply pandering to the desires of people around them, be it in some form of fashion or in being popular, saying things that are popular, doing silly things, or maybe provocative things to garner that type of interest. And that's what we mean, Chanel, by influencers. Influencers are coming up in our society, and they see themselves as leaders, and other people view them as leaders because everybody else is looking. That's why when you look at things online, everybody wants you to like them and that kind of stuff. If you ever look at YouTube, everybody talks about, subscribe and like. Not so. I mean, I have a YouTube channel. I post your my recordings there for the classes, but I don't tell you you have to subscribe and like. I just say just go there and visit the material and interface with it. All right. Um, but I use it as a tool to facilitate teaching. Other people use it as a way in which to make money and to become influential in the world that they operate in. So that's anthropology for you in terms of looking at how people arrive in positions of power and influence through the use of the technology that's available to them. That's interesting, isn't it? All right, so another way in which we look at leadership is through history. And when we talk about history, we talk about the people who played significant roles in the historic events of our our history, our past. They're especially associated primarily with major social movements that take place in our lifespan. So, for example, these guys, how many of you all recognize these four guys?
One of them is Hitler,
All right, which one is that?
the third person.
The person is Hitler. So, if we're talking about Hitler, it means therefore we're talking about World War II. This was ended in 1945. All right, so this is far back in history for a lot of you. So, if this is Hitler, who are the guys around him?
Is the one in the second image something Chapman? Can't remember.
Churchill.
Churchill, yes.
Right. Winston Churchill, who was the
Win-
Prime Minister of England during the war. Yes. But that means who's the guy on the extreme left?
Pablo Escobar,
Pablo Escobar.
yeah.
My left or your left? The left is over here, right? I hope.
No,
This is these are all guys involved in World War II. So this is the Prime Minister of England. This is the Premier or the Chancellor of Germany at the time. This here is the President of the United States. That was Roosevelt. And this gentleman here was the Premier of Russia. And he precursored the Soviet Union. In fact, he created the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was allies with the British and the Americans in the war against Germany. Now, you might find that sounds really funny. Well, how come Russia and the Soviet Union were partners with everybody else to defeat Germany? Because they had a common enemy. And then after the war finished, when Germany surrendered and Hitler died, or killed himself, I should say, after the failure in the war, these guys then sort of turned their backs on Stalin. This is Joseph Stalin, and Stalin then became ostracized, and it created that Cold War period that we see a lot of spy movies about from that period. A lot of James Bond movies are about that, where you have the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union separating from the Western world, and that created a whole hullabaloo of different things that went on after the fact. So these guys were fundamentally linked to the World War II, but there are other things that they're identified with. What about this gentleman? How many of you all recognize him? And what social movement is he associated with? Nobody?
Yes,
Martin Luther.
Yes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. All right, and he's associated with what movement?
Civil rights.
In America, right? The civil rights movement of America in America focused its attention on the rights and freedoms of the African Americans in the United States. Now, coming out of him, we have this gentleman here. Any of you all recognize him? Somebody must recognize this young man. But he's no longer younger. And I chose this picture because I know
Why you choose a young picture?
because he looks a lot like this. Well, a lot like
You're
this.
looking like Cosby.
Like who? Bill Cosby?
Bill Cosby.
No.
But no, there's probably Mandela, and I don't know if
No,
I
it's not Mandela. That's not Mandela either. All right, so this guy's name is Stokely Carmichael, and he changed his name in the late 70s to Kwame Ture. That name sounds familiar? He's a Trinidadian, by the way, just letting you all know. He became a force to be reckoned. He came back to Trinidad because he was part of the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King. And he came back to Trinidad and brought the Black Power movement to Trinidad. And that led to our 1970 Black Power Revolution. You all
What's
know
his name again?
Stokely Carmichael, but he changed his name to Kwame Ture.
Oh,
You all know
mhm.
that Kwame Ture. Remember, this was back in the day when, just say it again. This is back in the day when a lot of people were throwing away or giving up their Western names and selecting African names because of the loss of their heritage. You all know about that, right? People like Muhammad Ali did the same thing. His name was Cassius Clay, and then he changed it in the late 60s, 70s into Muhammad Ali, right, when he converted to Islam. Kwame Ture was also involved in that movement, and he came back to Trinidad and led the Black Power Revolution, which was literally civil war in Trinidad and Tobago that tried to reposition um, Afro Trinidadians in positions of power where they weren't allowed because of the colonial heritage of the British in the system. Back in the days that he came back to Trinidad, um, black people couldn't work in banks, they couldn't work in stores. There are a lot of things that people could not do and couldn't own certain parts. You all know a club in Port of Spain called Country Club? Anybody familiar with that? I mean, you don't hear about it much anymore.
Heard about the name. I just
Country Club, that was a club that was exclusively for white, for the white planter class to go on and have their soirees, their parties and whatnot. Black people were allowed to work there, but they weren't allowed to go there. Mocha, you all know that area, the golf club. Only
Yes,
white people, yeah, only white people could have gone play golf there. There were sections of Trinidad and Tobago that were totally white only, and those are the kind of things, because the planter class, which was white, became the business class, which remained white, and they took control of all of the economic power in the country, and therefore controlled all the decision making. So even though we had an elected prime minister and ministers and whatnot, the people who held on to the purse strings were the ones who maintained influence over everything else. You couldn't become prime minister if you didn't get financial support from the the moneyed class in Trinidad. So those are things you want to pay attention to. I look at this bunch of influencers from history. How many of these influencers can you recognize? I recognize most, but there are a couple that I haven't I have no clue who they are. They look vaguely familiar to certain people. So let me start help you all here. This is Mahatma Gandhi. He was part of the movement of India becoming independent from the United States, not the United States, from Britain, and was also unfortunately um, there when Pakistan and India separated, and that was the whole situation. Now we met this guy here. Of course, it's clear now that he's Adolf Hitler, and the symbol that you see there is the swastika, which is reminiscent of the Nazi movement. This picture here is of the first man on the moon. This is Lance Armstrong. He's associated with, of course, the space drive that went on. This gentleman here is anybody from social sciences can recognize him. There's a reason why.
So off topic a little bit.
Uh-huh. Go ahead. Ask questions.
But do you really believe that he was the first man to land on the moon?
On the moon, as far as I know,
Yes.
yeah. The
Okay,
first one
because
to
I had.
walk on the planet.
Where's that?
The first person to walk on the moon is him. I'm taking it. I'm taking history as it was presented to me, not the conspiracy theories that we hear about. All right.
So I
Right.
just had I just find that it's a little weird that 50 years later we cannot reach any moon again.
But there's no
When
point to it.
technology is 10 times better, everything
It's
10
not that
times
we
better.
can't.
But
It's not that we can't get to the moon. You know, it's that the reach of the reach of space is gone beyond the moon's thing. You should look at this guy. There's a guy who talks a lot about that. Yeah. This physics person. Seeing him as a black guy, and he talks a lot about science and stuff like that. Anyway, let's get back to these photos. This is Lenin. Sorry, no, this is Karl Marx. He created the theories based upon communism that Stalin utilized to create the Soviet Union. So Lenin is Karl Marx and Lenin are the people who are responsible for that. You should know this lady here, this nun. This is Mother Teresa. She was important in the development of servant type leadership where everybody else is more important than the leader. This is Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, no, Frank Roosevelt, President of the United States during the war years. This is Winston Churchill with giving his victory sign after winning the war. We met him already, Martin Luther King. This is um, Nelson Mandela, the first black prime minister or president of South Africa, but also the freedom fighter who got rid of apartheid. This gentleman here is Cecil Roach. Well, I hope it's Cecil Roach because I think it's the only one. He was the inventor of the apartheid, or the person who had basically um, systematically set up the apartheid system that ran South Africa. This is anybody recognizes her? This is Margaret Thatcher. She was the first female prime minister um, of England and was collectively known by the opposition. Well, around the world, she was known as the Iron Lady, and in the opposition, she was known as the Witch. This gentleman I can't place. I'm not too certain who he is. See something about Alfred something there, but I'm not sure. Similarly with this individual, I'm not sure, but I think they may be influential in what no what Margaret Thatcher is influential in is actually in anti-government politics, anti-labor politics, because she was important in the development of conservative politics in the UK, and the labor movement suffered under her because of the policies that she did. She started to privatize everything in the UK, that the UK government under Churchill had set up to protect the people. She started dismantling it and creating things like the dole and whatnot, and that was a problem for a lot of people. They didn't like her. This gentleman here, you should recognize. This is Fidel Castro. He is the creator of the leader of Cuban socialist movement. He's associated with these gentlemen up here in the sense that he borrowed from their communist system to develop the socialist system that he created in Cuba. It's interesting that he's coupled here with Ronald Reagan, a president in the United States, who was the longest serving president in the United States. It was after him they started to put in term limits because by the time he got to his third term, he was senile and duddering around the place making all kind of nonsense statements. And the country was actually run. It's important that he's there because during that period, he faced off a lot of times against um, the Castro in terms of the things that they were doing. Actually, to bring these people together here, Castro was during the period of this gentleman here, who's Khrushchev. He was the premier of Russia at the time. And this gentleman here is Gorbachev. Gorbachev was important because he ended the Soviet Union. Um, And that actually happened when the wall went down and the Soviet Union started to move away from the communist agenda that it usually had. When we come to this side here, this pair here, this is President Reagan, and this gentleman here is not. This is Teddy Roosevelt, another prime president of the United States. He was a wartime president, but that was after the Civil War period that went on. This guy here, this is Walt Disney, famous for the development of um, animation and the Disney empire. It was his brainchild to develop entertainment in that sense. Associated with entertainment is this lady here, Norma May, who most people know as Marilyn Monroe, who was arguably the first um, sex bombshell that rose to international fame. Don't know this guy. Looks like I don't know. Uh, He reminds me of Booth, the guy who assassinated Lincoln, but I'm unsure about that. But then we get to these sets here of musicians. This is Elvis Presley. He well, there was a recent film about him, and these are the Beatles here, John, Paul, and George, and they are arguably some of the biggest influences of music coming out of history, both in the primarily in the fields of rock and roll and popular rock music and pop music. So all of these people influence a lot of different fields in the world around us during their period, and sometimes and some of the impact of what they've done lasted until today. I mean, if we think about it from that perspective. All right. Okay, so this is leadership in history. Let's look at leadership from another point of view. For those of you who've done psych and soc, you would recognize that psychology pays attention to individuals, whereas sociology looks at the entire group. Now, from these studies, these individuals have arisen who have been able to influence the theories that we're going to look at moving forward. So when we look at it from leadership from this particular thing, it's we need to understand the individual and how the individual interacts with the society, which is why the importance of psychology and sociology becomes critical when we begin to observe leadership, because again, we're focusing on the relationship. And these gentlemen here are kind of fundamental people in the fields. So we have Sigmund Freud. Um, this is, oh God, not Karl Marx. This is Lenin. He was a sociologist. And this gentleman here, B.F. Skinner, he was critical in the development of educational thinking and theory, which a lot of which is going to influence us. In fact, a lot of these theories that we're going to be looking at in terms of leadership theories all kind of come out from behavioral studies and psychology, so that they're going to influence each other. So we're going to be seeing a lot of them, their work influencing what we have to do. Now that brings us to a question here that we want to ask. And after we ask this question, we'll take a little break, okay? How does your field of study or your field of work approach leadership? How do you approach leadership? These are questions that you need to examine in your mind, and maybe we could attack it from these. Who here is actually currently employed and working somewhere? Nobody? What field of study are you in? Now, some of you all here, I think, are management students. So obviously the management field of study is what comes to mind. Yes? All right, let me leave
So
it for
I'm
now.
doing radiography.
Right, so how does leadership arrive? How do people arrive at leadership positions in radiography? That was Nyla, right?
So I'm just assuming is the amount of knowledge you collect over the years. It's more like practice makes perfect.
All right. So knowledge and experience, and
Experience.
all right, and in a lot of instances, certification. So your knowledge is reinforced by the certification that you get as a radiologist and the different the amount of time you put in. But radiology has a limit to the amount of time you're actually able to operate the equipment. You have to step back from it after a particular period of time. Who's the radiology person? Jada, is you?
I think Kurt, someone else.
Okay. I'm trying to get them to come back in the conversation, but they seem to be ducking. All right. Before we wrap up for a little bit, take a break, I should say. Um, I want us to look at this quotation here that came out from the text. The superficial leader, um, as opposed to the reflective leader. That's the comparison that's being made here. The superficial leader cannot see things, cannot see how things happen, even though the evidence is everywhere. This leader is swept up by the drama of the events surrounding them, the sensation and the excitement. All this confusion is blinding, and therefore it you can't see why things are happening. But the leader who returns again and again to awareness of process has a deep sense of how things happen. All right, and that brings me to this photo here, because President Trump embodied for me the very epitome of superficial leadership. Because in this circumstance here, this is when he had made the decision to withdraw the United States from all the conventions that were signed on into the Kyoto negotiations in the G10 summits, the environmental summits. And this was a situation where the other leaders from all the other countries were trying to get him to change his stance on the environmental issues. And you can see from his body language that he's just closed off from everybody. And of course, everybody's kind of leaning over, trying to get his attention and insist upon him. And of course, the spectacle of the event is what was most important to him. Because remember, he would go around shoving people around and getting in front of them for one-upmanship all the time. It was really hilarious and disturbing to see a grown man behaving the way he was and being so um, I'm gonna have to say so silly in terms of some of the things. But he reflected to me the epitome of this quotation as of the superficial leader whose focus is not on how things are done and why things are happening the way they are, but is just swept up in the drama, sensation, the excitement of the movement because it scores points. And this actually speaks to the situation we have where you have all these influential people or influencers who utilize the sensationalism of an event or the sensationalism of what they have to say to gather followers and basically pandering to the basis fears or basis desires of particular groups in society to become influencers and leaders. And that's a dangerous way in which we need to look a way in terms of looking at leadership. What we should be really is leaders who are involved in reflection and full awareness or as much awareness as possible of what is happening and how things are happening so that we could make sense of things as opposed to just add to the confusion of what's going on around us. All right, so at this point, we're going to start observing or looking at the relational leadership model. And so we're going to pause here for about, let's say about 10-15 minutes, give you a break, and then we'll come back and start again. Everybody's okay with that? Taking a break at this time? Yes?
Yes.
All right. So do get up and take a stretch, okay? Go on, look at the forest or the bush and stuff. All right, Josiah?
What time we coming back?
And let's say next 15 minutes, that'll be 3:45 or so. 3. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, let's come back at about 3:45 or just thereabouts. Okay. All right. See you all in a little bit, guys. You don't have to leave. I'll just stop the recording for now and then start it back when we come back.